The really dramatic thing that happened was an event known as the Boston Massacre. I posted a little short History Channel video about it. Those are all a bit shallow and they uh, oversimplify things. Okay. British troops are stationed in Boston. Things are reaching a breaking point. It's late February of 1770. A rumor passes through the town, greeted with great excitement, that the British troops were about to be withdrawn. Proved not to be true. That puts everybody in a really ugly mood. We reach the evening of March 5th, 1770, and obviously tensions are nearing a breaking point. The shoe is about to drop. And we had groups of, young men, probably about half sauced up, roaming around looking for trouble. And you may observe when you look for trouble, the chances you find it are pretty high. A lot of people are out in the streets. They're ringing all the church bells. That usually means one thing. That means that a building is on fire. Normally what that is, it's a building is on fire and people turn out to fight the fire. So the word fire, got it? Okay. So the British military is not necessarily prepared for all this. The building where the tax collectors are headquartered is called the Customs House. It's being guarded by one single British soldier. By the way, they're called redcoats because they wore red coats. What a thing. So here he is out trudging up and down. It's still, there's still ice and snow on the ground. It's still wintertime. He's out there by himself, trying to keep warm, clutching his single-shot musket that would take him around 15 seconds to reload, even under optimal conditions. These are not optimal conditions. Okay. He draws the attention of a group of men and boys looking for trouble. They see that red coat over there, and they decide to have some fun with that red coat. They stagger over there and begin heckling the poor guy, and that mob psychology sets in. They're getting more and more aggressive with their heckling and loud. Windows go up, heads come out, and a crowd begins to gather, and mob psychology takes over. Because people will do things in groups, people will do things at night that they would never do as individuals. So here's this soldier backed up against the wall with his single-shot musket, surrounded by an increasingly angry, out-of-control crowd. He doesn't have many choices. Okay, if he stands his ground, this mob may injure or kill him. If he runs away, the army will surely hang him for deserting his post. Well, presently he is joined by about 6 more soldiers under the command of a captain named, I believe, James Preston. Ironically, Captain Preston had been working overtime in recent days trying to keep everybody calmed down. He's not a bad guy. Anyway, now you've got a total of 8 British soldiers, 7 regular enlisted men, and Captain Preston backed up against the wall with loaded muskets. And here, literally at bad breath range, there's this increasingly dangerous, out-of-control mob shouting at them, heckling them, cursing them, and daring them to fire. Why would they do something like that? Because they understood, and this is actually true, and military is in it now, soldiers are strictly disciplined not to discharge their weapons unless ordered to do so. And it was also believed, at least, that this captain did not have the authority to order shots to be fired. That would have to come from higher up. So it's an echo chamber, brick walls everywhere, shouting, out of control, and the word fire echoing from all directions. Some people were daring the soldiers to fire, and others just wanted to know where the fire was. Well, for whatever reason, the soldiers, I think one of the soldiers got hit with something somebody threw. At least that's what the video was showing. Maybe whoever did that knows more than I do. It's quite likely. And the soldiers fired their muskets into the crowd. probably without orders to do so. So that came out in a trial that was held later. They killed 5 people. They wounded 6 more, I believe it was. The first man actually to die was a free African American named Crispus Attucks, who wasn't even part of the mob. He was standing across the street just watching. Wrong place, wrong time, caught a bullet, died on the spot. And I almost passed by this. There's a lesson for life in all this that you might want to keep down in your little book of lessons for life. See if this doesn't resonate. Never frighten someone who has a gun. Got it? Not many good things can happen. That doesn't exonerate somebody who shoots at you, but just don't scare them. It's just dumb. Well, there we go. According to one somewhat fictionalized account of this I read many years ago, the next sound the stunned crowd heard was the soldiers ramming home another charge in case a second helping wasn't necessary. It's not believed that Captain Preston ordered them to fire, but if he did, other than not having orders from higher up, he would be within policy. Okay, these are neither the first nor the last British soldiers to confront a mob. And if nothing else works, that's what you do. Just fire into them and see if I don't get their attention. Anyway, this was stunning. Now, that's more or less what happened. Again, I've read a number of accounts, kind of distills them together. Hard to really tell. Now, the story that went around, greatly pushed by one of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, a silversmith named Paul Revere, he did an etching capable of being reprinted in newspapers purporting to show this. It's got the streets, it's got the soldiers out there. They're drawn up in a disciplined formation. They got those muskets shouldered up, and they're firing. And here's Captain Preston with his sword out there. It looks like they're firing upon just a bunch of innocent Bostonians just going about their personal business in the streets of Boston. It's accompanied by, I think technically the term would be doggerel. That means low-level pretense of poetry with a highly provocative version of what's happened here. That should all sound familiar, shouldn't it? We have things that happen today, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. Don't be too mad at me. There are people today who protest incidents, and that's not new in American life, but I'm going to say something that might sound controversial. Some of these people should have a first-hand familiarity of the mentality of a lynch mob. These are people who do not trust judicial processes to get it right, and they take matters into their own hands, and they're not interested in facts or context. Well, all right, within a day or 2 or 3, the British troops had been withdrawn from the city because the tensions were simply too high. We don't want getting out of control. So it turns out there was a number of islands in Boston Harbor. It's several miles to the open ocean out there. And there was a fort, which had been originally built way back in 1634 by the Puritans who first showed up. They were afraid King Charles I would send troops against them. He didn't. But they built the fort, and it had been enlarged and enlarged and enlarged over the years. It had different names. By this time, it's called Castle William. Wasn't a small place. You could put several hundred soldiers in there, and they had their voices echoing. So the troops are out of town. The soldiers who participated in the massacre were kept in town, locked up to stand trial. So eventually, a couple of months later, they came to trial, and they were defended. It's my understanding there were 3 court-appointed attorneys. 2 of them were sympathetic to the British government. One of them was one of the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, John Adams, who would, 6 years later, be among the most vocal proponents of independence. He would be a diplomat during the war. He would be the first vice president and second president of the United States. So defended the Redcoats. John Adams always had his own lawyerly way of thinking. What's he thinking here? It's not popular. I mean, the Tories, I'll tell you later who they were. They were just thinking, wow, he's come over, he's flipped, he's on our side. Not exactly. John Adams did not want British leaders to get the idea that Boston had descended into mob rule. His interest here is not so much sympathy for the British soldiers as it is to make the point that the rule of law still applied in Boston. And he got him off. John Adams lived to be 91, and he was only, let me think, 35 or so when this happened. And to the end of his life, he said that, and he was a lawyer, so that was the best bit of lawyer he ever did. I say, John, you probably got that right. By the time the trial occurred, things were much calmer. The British troops were out of town, and we had received word that, ironically, on the same day as the Boston Massacre, the British Parliament across the sea had repealed 4 of the 5 Townshend duties. And they left one of them in place, the one that would probably bring in the most revenue. They left it in place just to show that, yes, we can tax your bohiny if we want to. That would be the tax on tea. We're not through with it. Everything calms down after that, but people are left with very strong impressions that the British, long seen as it would be that at least in our economic interest to stay in the empire, but they're becoming a hostile, even foreign force. But things calm down. The British troops are, I think 1 or 2 of them were convicted. They received light sentences. But the rest of 1770, all of 1771, all of 1772, into 1773, nothing much happens. Crickets, you might say. And if you're somebody like Sam Adams, I think I mentioned this in another connection earlier, we got to keep this fire going somehow. There's nothing to have a rebellion about. British leaders thought it was all over. All that protest stuff, that was back in the 60s. That probably doesn't have context for you guys. Kind of does for me. In 1772, there were 3 things that all happened in New England. They were local news, but they cast a very long shadow. These are not big things. These are not enough to get a real big protest going. I don't know in exactly what order they happened, but just pick one off the top. The acting governor of Massachusetts, in those days, they might appoint somebody to be the governor. He wouldn't stoop so low as to come over. He would sublet that, but I believe he was the lieutenant governor. His name was Thomas Hutchinson. Remember Anne Hutchinson from 140 years earlier? I believe he was her great-great-grandson. Anyway, he announced to the general court that as of then, not only the governor, but everybody else on the colonial payroll would no longer be paid out of the treasury of Massachusetts. They would be paid by the king, the king's government. That might sound on the surface like good news. Wow, we're going to save some money. It's not good news. The power to pay the governor and these other officials, and what went with that is the power to threaten not to pay them. That's how they had exerted power over these people. That's about to be gone. Very sinister thing. Okay? And so that led to the revival of a communication network set up in Massachusetts a few years earlier, known as Committees of Correspondence. Correspondence is writing letters back and forth. This is a communication network at first. It was revived in Massachusetts in 1772 on another level, not necessarily directly connected. By the end of 1773, there were committees of correspondence at the colony level in all 13 colonies. What this is if the British pull some stunt somewhere, announce some new policy, certain members, and by the way, if you're not on a committee or married to somebody who is, you probably don't know it exists because you get in serious trouble for being involved in this. They would sit down and write letters to their contact in another colony or another town in Massachusetts. Okay? And that way you control the flow of information. You're not just depending on the rumor mill to carry the news, and you're not depending on people to figure out all by themselves what they ought to do about it. So at this point, it's like Frankenstein hitting the electrodes of the monster stands up. This had been an opinion thing. It becomes an organized movement. You can coordinate a response to things. And I think my time's about up, so I'll pick this up directly in part 5, I think it's going to be.